if you start with a universe of successful companies and say, what characteristics do these companies have in common, which is what a lot of business books do, or they don't even get that far. They just start with a successful company like Apple and start talking about it. They don't even compare Apple to other successful companies. You're not going to find the truth, really, because you have to first also compare to failures and see, what the failures were like also. And I suspect there are a lot of companies very much like Apple that try to do similar things that have not succeeded. Part of it is factors that I don't think luck is really the right word for it, but maybe path dependence. It sort of depends on where they started and what exactly the market was doing at the exact time that they came out with that product, and coming out with things at the right time and the wrong time. And that could be luck. It was may have been luck that Apple got into the smartphone game, a little bit later, let's say, or it may have been, they sometimes some things they seem to have to be dragged into, like having apps for the iPhone or something like that, that turned out to be a huge, a huge successful business in the end. When we look backwards, right, we can't really draw lessons for going forwards. I think that's the basic, the basic conclusion. You've got to look going forward and compare the failures to the successes. And not only that, even then you have the problem of causality, right? Because whatever Apple did, even if it was different from what some other company did, it wasn't randomly assigned for Apple to do that and the other, and other companies to do the opposite. The fact that Apple did something may have something to do with other factors about their company that we're not really looking at. This happens a lot when people. Another great example of this that I wrote about recently is research on the return on investment of going to college. So this is always very popular, especially around college application season. Everybody likes to publish these tables showing, which college gives you the greatest ROI. And there are so many flaws with these. I don't even want to call them studies. They're these sort of data tables that people cook up and so on, and sort of present them as though they're doing some kind of fantastic analysis and data science or something like that. One problem is that if you look at how much money people earned who went to different colleges, they weren't randomly assigned to go to those colleges, right? So the people who went to MIT may be making more money than the people who went to community college, but they're not the same people. So the fact that they went to MIT is only one of many differences, among them. They might have come from wealthier families to start with. They probably had higher math SATs and greater math ability to start with. They probably knew more about computer programming before they even, got to MIT. There's thousands of things that could be driving some of that, and it's probably some combination of those thousands of things, plus the fact that they went to MIT, that explain, the difference. But if you talk about return on investment, you're hypothetically saying, well, suppose I could choose to either go to this community college or go to MIT, which should I go to? But that was not the choice that's not the choice that most people face. Most people can't get into MIT, or substitute any other, top university or whatever you want to talk about.
The variables that got me into MIT are probably similar variables to what make me successful later in life.
Exactly. The things that enable you to get into MIT are things that are good ingredients for success no matter what. So the only good way to do this, there's almost no way to do this study for real, right? But causality is hard to test in the real world, because who's going to volunteer for experiment where we're going to say, let's have you apply to 20 colleges and then we'll randomly assign you to one of them or something like that. What colleges are going to let me, the experimenter, randomly determine the membership of their incoming class? It's never going to happen. But fortunately, there are researchers who have figured out very clever techniques to try to get at these things. And the best study that I know of this college ROI problem actually found people who had gotten into, let's say, again, just to pick hypothetical examples, Ohio State and Harvard. Big state school, low tuition, smaller, elite private school, high tuition. And when you have people who got into both, which there are some, and you look at the people who went, to one versus the people who went to the other, they actually don't differ in things like how much money they're making, their income later on, or other achievements, suggesting that it's sort of like being able to get into Harvard is really the important thing, not so much actually going to Harvard, at least for the variables that they measured in this study. It happens all the time, and yet the illusion of cause is attributing the difference in success to this one very salient factor. Often what we do is we sort of notice a salient factor and attribute everything to that. Part of the illusion of cause is thinking that causes are, unitary, that there's one thing that causes something else. For this chapter in our book, I actually had a research assistant go and search through the transcripts of Chris Matthews on Hardball, his show on MSNBC, where he would interview guests about the Iraq War, and he was very fixated on asking his guests at this time what was the reason for going to war in Iraq. And he kept on asking what was the reason. And it struck me that his question sort of presupposed that there was one reason, or that there was one reason which drove everything else, as opposed to perhaps 2, 3, 4, 5 interlocking reasons that combined to result in what in retrospect might have been a bad decision, but at the time seemed reasonable, and that it wasn't just one thing that caused that, but there were lots of causes. Yes, we don't often see all the variables that might cause things. It's hard for I think our minds are not designed to sort of weigh several interacting variables. That's a skill we learn even in graduate school, when we're learning how to do data analysis and so on, is to think about the relative weights of different factors in influencing an outcome. It's just not something that comes naturally to us. Now, there are probably some ways that we behave in everyday life that sort of seem like we're doing that, but that's because these are things our minds evolved to handle. So for example, in perception, in order to see the world as accurately as possible, the visual system takes into account a lot of different factors, like the light sources, how things are moving, the shadows, all kinds of other stuff. But that's all built into the hardware. The hardware is designed to take into account all those different factors. We don't have a general purpose hardware mechanism in our brain for multifactorial causal reasoning. It's just not something that comes naturally at all. So the illusion of cause is our tendency to think we see cause and effect or understand what causes what when we actually don't have true evidence for cause and effect. And another part of it is our tendency to think that events have one cause or decisions have one cause or reason, when in fact there are multiple factors. So people who are opposed to vaccinating their children for common diseases, right, measles, whooping cough, and so on, I think are in a way demonstrating the illusion of cause, because likely what they've heard about is the idea that vaccines might cause autism. And while there's no actual evidence that vaccines are even associated with autism across the population, it's a very compelling illusion to see or to hear of a child who received their vaccines for measles one day, and then 2 weeks later, a month later, started showing the symptoms of autism. Inevitably, there are going to be cases like that, because as long as there's autism, some kids are going to show symptoms of autism. And as long as people are being vaccinated, some kids are going to be vaccinated close to when they start showing the symptoms of autism. So our sort of built-in cause detector is going to find those examples, not look at, whether those examples would be things that would just happen, due to chance. So it's definitely an example of that kind of